Good evening. The brown half of that integrated and somewhat anthropomorphic romance is called Benji. A scruffy-looking Herbert, to be sure, but a super mutt for all that. A sort of working-class Rin Tin Tin. We'll be seeing more of Benji's adventures later on, along with a roundup of the rest of the week's new films and a look at an expensive new production at Elstree Studios, starring, among others, Faye Dunaway, Oscar Werner and Malcolm McDowell. But tonight I thought we might begin by considering the 1975 Academy Awards, especially in view of the fact that, just for once, the voters seem to have got it more or less right. Instead of heaping Oscars on Jaws, the world's most lucrative film, they gave just about every trophy in sight to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Best Film, Best Director, Milos Forman, Best Actor, Jack Nicholson, Best Actress, Louise Fletcher, and for good measure, Best Screenplay adapted from another source. The film is based on Ken Kesey's novel, and what makes the very conservative Academy's enthusiasm so remarkable is that it's an allegorical tale, depicting America as a kind of lunatic asylum, with Nicholson as the rebel kicking against the system. The firm, well-intentioned but insensitive establishment is represented by Louise Fletcher as Nurse Ratched, with whom, as we can now see, Nicholson conducts a running battle.
Excuse me, miss. Do you think it might be possible to turn that music down so maybe a couple of the boys could talk?
That music is for everyone, Mr. McMurphy.
Yeah, I know, but you think we might ease it down a little bit so maybe the boys didn't have to shout? Huh?
What you probably don't realize is that we have a lot of old men on this ward who couldn't hear the music if we turned it lower. That music is all they have. Your hand is staining my window.
Oh, sorry, man. I'm really sorry.
Mr. McMurphy,
huh?
Your medication.
What's in the horse pill?
It's just medicine. It's good for you.
Yeah, but I don't like the idea of taking something if I don't know what it is.
Don't get upset, Mr. McMurphy.
I'm not getting upset, Miss Pilbo. It's just that I don't want anyone to try and slip me saltpeter. You know what I mean?
It's all right, Nurse Pilbo. If Mr. McMurphy doesn't want to take his medication orally, I'm sure we can arrange that he can have it some other way. But I don't think you'd like it, Mr. McMurphy.
You'd like it, wouldn't you?
Well,
Give it to me.
Good. Very good.
Yummy.
Mr. Harding?
Oh. Merci.
Tell me, lover boy, why didn't you tell her to go?
Well, a few weeks ago, Nicholson, Miss Fletcher and Milos Forman were in London for the European opening of the film. And this is what Jack Nicholson had to say about his role.
You don't really realize until you're playing this part how many big scenes there are. You know, you never just get to order your bacon, eggs, and sit there and relax. You know, it's you're either strangling someone or having a shock treatment or, you know, reacting to someone who's screaming and, you know, or creating a false baseball game or trying to make a gang of lunatics behave like a basketball team or getting a lobotomy or returning from shock treatment. It's the scope of the scenes. The level of it is challenging, and I think also for an actor, I don't know how most actors feel, but the hardest thing for me to do when I'm acting is to be on the spot. You know, I like to get myself into a feeling that the camera's not watching me. And the structure of this part is that all of the other inmates are watching you all the time. And so you feel on stage, which is just the feeling I don't like to have. And that was some of the most. That plus everyone felt before I did it that I should play the part beautifully and that it was written for me.
As Nicholson is probably the best film actor in the business, and he's now been nominated 5 times, I reckon his Oscar could be regarded as not only well-deserved, but considerably overdue. I'm not arguing with the choice of Louise Fletcher either, although, strictly speaking, I didn't think the part of Nurse Ratched amounted to much more than a strong supporting role. But the most curious Academy Award, purely because of the category in which it came, was the Oscar George Burns won as Best Supporting Actor in The Sunshine Boys. Now, when I saw that film, I believed, and I'm pretty sure Mr. Burns did too, that he was Walter Matthau's co-star. Could it be that the Academy nominations, there was a little sentimental rigging of the odds to give old George a bit of a boost in his new career as a movie actor at the age of 80? Well, I don't suppose anyone objects too much, except perhaps the other, more genuine supporting actors who may feel they've been robbed. Still, The Sunshine Boys is a delightful film, and the performances of both George Burns and Walter Matthau as a pair of retired vaudeville stars contemplating a comeback were quite superb.
So, what do you think? Want to do the doctor sketch?
Well, listen, it's very good money. It's only a few days' work, and I can be back in New Jersey. If you feel you want to do it, then I'm agreeable.
And they told you how I feel about it?
What?
I'm against it. But if you want, I'll do it.
What do you mean you're against it? If you're against it, don't do it.
What do you care if I'm against it, as long as we're doing it? I just want you to know why I'm doing it.
Well, don't do me any favors.
Who's doing you a favor? I'm doing my nephew a favor. It'll be a big break for the kid to get a couple of big stars like us.
Oh, that's different. Then in that case, I'm against it too, but I'll do it.
As long as we understand each other.
I want to be sure you know that I'm not doing it for the money. The money goes to my grandchildren.
The whole thing?
The whole thing. But not now. Only if I die. If I don't die, it'll be for my old age.
Well, now let's have a swift rundown of some of the other Oscars. The award for Best Supporting Actress went to Lee Grant as the rich, bored Hollywood housewife comprehensively seduced by Warren Beatty in Shampoo. Dog Day Afternoon, starring Al Pacino as an ineffectual bank robber, was in the running for almost as many awards as One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but finally had to be satisfied with the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. Jaws ended up with a few technical prizes: Best Sound, Best Editing, Best Music Score. And so did Stanley Kubrick's historical drama Barry Lyndon, which was named for Best Cinematography, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design and Best Adapted Score. And we can all take a little chauvinistic pleasure in that, because most of the recipients were British. As for Robert Altman's splendid Nashville, well, there the voters were considerably less than generous. All it won was the Oscar for Best Original Song, I'm Easy, composed and sung by Keith Carradine. Perhaps Nashville was too obviously a satire on America in bicentenary year and offended too many patriotic instincts. However, the undoubted success of this year's ceremony was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the first film to take all 5 major Oscars since It Happened One Night in 1934. That was directed by Frank Capra and starred Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert. Interesting, I think, to have a quick look at it now, if only to see how much or how little the movies have changed in the last 40 years. Here's Claudette Colbert showing Clark Gable how to hitch a lift.
Do you mind if I try?
You? Don't make me laugh.
Oh, you're such a smart Alex. Nobody knows anything but you. I'll stop a car, and I won't use my thumb.
What are you going to do?
The system on my own. Aren't you going to give me a little credit?
What for?
Well, I've proved once and for all that the limb is mightier than the thumb.
Not a bad pair of legs, that, and still a very charming movie even today. But I wonder how many Oscars it would have won if it had been eligible for this year's awards. Ah, well. Let's move on to the week's new films. A fairly shabby bunch, I'm sorry to say. If I begin with Mahogany, it's only because it stars Diana Ross, and with the Oscars still in mind, you may recall that she was nominated for Best Actress 3 years ago after her first film, Lady Sings the Blues, a watered-down version of the life of the jazz singer Billie Holiday. In a second picture, Miss Ross plays a fashion model and dress designer called Mahogany, and she's called that because Anthony Perkins, as the photographer who discovers her, is under the weird impression that mahogany is the only word to describe something soft, warm and brown. Well, after seeing the film, I could have suggested another word. The plot is quite ludicrous, like a Jacqueline Suzanne novel without the sex, and if you take the sex out of a Jacqueline Suzanne novel, there's not a whole lot left. Briefly, Miss Ross is torn between her own career in Rome and loyalty to Billy D. Williams as an incorruptible black politician and stud in Harlem. The keynote of all this nonsense is a line delivered with an admirably straight face by the aforementioned Mr. Williams. Success is nothing without someone you love to share it with. Gosh, I wish I'd said that. Mind you, Miss Ross is no slouch at the aphorisms herself. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, she replies with crushing wit to someone or other. And she also delivers my favourite line in the whole film, "Nobody is better off dead, Carlotta." But time now, I think, to have a look at her, at a charity fashion show where the aristocracy are bidding for the dresses. She decides to wear one of her own creations. As a matter of interest, Diana Ross doesn't actually sing in the film, but she did design all the clothes, and I can't help wishing she'd sung a bit instead. But now a swift change of mood. A biblical epic from Israel called Rachel's Man. How's this for openers?
When you awake, you shall be mine. You shall bear a new name. I name you Ish Rachel, Rachel's Man.
Rachel's man turns out to be Jacob, the chap in Genesis, who, as we're reminded, had a short life full of hardship. Well, it wasn't all that short. I mean, he was 54 before he even married Rachel. And though I don't deny he had his share of hardships, he had his share of the goodies too. He had Rachel for one, and her sister Leah for another, not to mention a couple of nubile bond maidens. By the time he finished with that lot, he'd raised enough sons to field his own soccer team and still have a substitute on the bench. Anyway, Leonard Whiting plays Jacob, an Israeli actress, Michal Bat Adam is Rachel, and Rita Tushingham turns up in a black wig as Leah. The film, a curious melange of biblical and other legends, is directed by Moshe Mizrahi. It's an odd choice of subject because the story of Jacob always strikes me as anticlimactic. Well, take his brother Esau, for instance, the one who came out of the womb red all over like an hairy garment, and later on so put the frighteners on his brother that Jacob ran away from home for 21 years. You'd expect some kind of showdown at high noon eventually, but it never comes. And in this film, Esau stumps about quite promisingly at the beginning, all red and hairy, and then vanishes forever. Still against that, we do have Mickey Rooney playing Jacob's uncle Laban like some elderly Old Testament dead-end kid. Here he is arranging a marriage deal with Jacob.
I've stayed under your roof for a whole moon now. Well, perhaps my brother has forgotten. Perhaps I can go back to my native land.
You are innocent. To think that your brother would have forgotten by this time. Now, I'm afraid it'll be many moons will come and go before that comes to pass. Now, you say you want to work for me, and we both know that you have no other choice. Working for me, you expect to get paid? Under what conditions?
Well,
I mean, speak up. Don't beat around the bush.
Uncle, I love your daughter Rachel.
Yes, and then what?
And I want her for my wife. With your consent, of course. I've already spoken to her.
Do you know what you've just said? It's out of the question.
But why?
The bride price. The bride price, my friend.
I'll work for you for a time. I'll take no wages.
You'll work for me for a time? How long a time? I don't know. You did say Leah, didn't you?
I didn't.
You didn't?
No, I said Rachel. Oh, Leah is a fine woman, of course, but it's Rachel I see in my dreams.
Dreams? Dreams will get you nowhere.
Had he really been there only a moon? I thought he'd been around much longer. Moon and a half, at least. Anyway, back to Benji, who is a small brown dog living an independent existence in a deserted house on the outskirts of a small town in America. He spends most of his time going around scrounging food and being cute, a friend and confidant to all. Quite early on, he succumbs to the feminine wiles of a small white bitch of undeniably better pedigree. But because human beings are peripherally involved in the film as well, before he can settle down to the canine equivalent of wedded bliss, he's obliged to foil a dastardly kidnapping plot. And that's more or less all there is to say about it, except that it has a Disney-esque charm, though lacking Disney's gloss and pace, and that children and dog lovers everywhere will probably enjoy it. As for the kidnapping plot, well, here we see Benji single-handed, or perhaps I should say single-pawed, trying to lead the block-headed humans to the house where the villains are hiding.
I suppose we might as well start right at the beginning and work ourselves up to what we've accomplished so far. Floyd, where's the note?
Oh, I've got it here.
This is the ransom note. There weren't any fingerprints, and we haven't heard anything from handwriting yet.
How was it delivered?
Well, Doctor, would you mind going over it one more time, please?
Yes, I got a call at my office, supposedly from Cindy's school, that she had been in some sort of accident. They asked me if I could come right over to the nurse's office. When I went to the parking lot to get in my car, I found this pinned to the visor.
I see. And have they called yet?
No.
Has there been any attempt to get a hold of you at all since you
No,
got
we've
the note?
had a little trouble getting the phone.
No!
trouble you could have caused us if you'd have gotten away with this?
Shame foiled again. The other new film this week is The Ultimate Warrior, which is set in the 21st century, about 40 years hence, and presents a view of the future even gloomier than that predicted by the Cambridge economists. The world has been overtaken by plague and famine, the whole of civilization has broken down, and in America anyway, the few survivors of the human race live in heavily barricaded communes, practice cannibalism, and descend on passing strangers as ferociously as the Stretford Enders at Manchester United. Max von Sydow plays the leader of one of the more civilised communes, and Yul Brynner is the fighting man he hires to protect his people from their enemies. Up to this point, the film is interesting and thought-provoking, and the director and writer, Robert Klaus, is skilled at building up tension. But for reasons best known to himself, he discards characterisation and plot development in favour of increasing violence, excessive and gratuitous violence at that. There was a time when film directors could, because they had to, suggest violence without showing it. But that's an art which Mr. Klaus has long forgotten, if he ever mastered it. In his picture, the brutality is self-defeating. You cease to care about the fate of people who behave like that. Here's a fairly mild example of the kind of thing I mean. The scene in which Yul Brynner decides to throw in his lot with Max von Sydow and his friends as they're attacked by street marauders. Well, as I said, that's fairly tame stuff. Later on, there was a scene which I simply couldn't bear to watch. What I find depressing about The Ultimate Warrior is that the British Board of Film Censors has seen fit to give it a AA certificate, and the logic of that escapes me. Surely there's something wrong with a form of censorship under which a film that shows two people making love to each other is automatically given an X certificate, while a picture like this, in which you lose count of the number of men and women who are viciously hacked to death with knives and crowbars, gets a AA, and can therefore be seen by children of 14. Are we to assume that the new motto of the British Board of Film Censors is "Make war, not love"? However, fairness demands that I should also point out that The Ultimate Warrior includes a couple of good performances by Yul Brynner and Max von Sydow. Mr. von Sydow, who never seems to stop working these days, will be seen again later in the year in a film called Voyage of the Damned, which has been made at Elstree Studios by Sir Lou Grade's company. It's a big-budget production costing about £3 million, and including in its cast the likes of Lee Grant, the recent Oscar winner, Orson Welles, James Mason, and Malcolm McDowell. As to what it's about, the following filmed report will, I trust, reveal all. Otherwise, it's perhaps sufficient to say that it takes place aboard a ship in 1939, and that on the day we visited the set, the American director, Stuart Rosenberg, was filming a scene in the first-class salon that involved a monocled Faye Dunaway and Oscar Werner. Incidentally, The Voyage of the Damned is a true story, and the script is based on a book by Gordon Thomas and Max Morgan-Witts.
It's about a trip, a voyage on a ship which left Germany in May 1939 with 937 passengers on board. They were refugees. A large proportion were Jews, not all, but some of those Jews had been allowed out of the concentration camps to go on this voyage. Must have been an ironic sort of situation for some of those who'd been in the concentration camps and then found themselves on a luxury liner being looked after hand and foot by Germans, their every whim looked after, traveling across to Cuba. Many hundreds, thousands had done this before them. But when they arrived in Cuba, for many reasons, political, propaganda, plain Cuban skullduggery, they were not allowed to land. So they stayed on the ship many days in the hot heat of Havana Harbor. They were then ordered out. the captain of the ship, who was enormously courageous and had delayed returning to Europe, going against the orders he was in fact receiving from Germany, had to turn back. No one would have his passengers, nor indeed his ship.
454, take 1 A and B cameras. Background action!
The usual end of Voyage party was given just before they arrived in Havana. I think this party, which is beautifully recreated in the film, is one of the highlights of the film. It has a feeling of the late 30s, of the sort of strange, unreal situation that life had at that time for many people. Malcolm McDowell plays the steward to the captain.
I'm what is commonly known as the love interest. I fall in love with one of the passengers, a Jewess, who's travelling on the ship. And it's rather dramatic because, as an Aryan, my character is hiding the fact that his mother is Jewish, you see, and of course the Gestapo are investigating him as well. The scene that follows this, the girl, Lynn Frederick, that I fall in love with, is coming to this masked ball. I'm the captain's steward, I can't come to the ball, right? So that I meet her. We have a secret meeting place on the ship. And we play a scene, and then I give her a flower. So I'm just to make that tie in, you see, I'm just putting down the masks for the ball, and I just see a flower and take it.
Faye Dunaway plays the wife of Dr. Chrysler. She's still alive today, living in Germany. She is a quite extraordinary lady, was then and is today. At a masked ball on the ship, she arrived, came down the stairway in a slinky gown with a long slit and high black boots and wearing a monocle. Well, Faye Dunaway is dressed in this fashion in the film, but that's not laid on by the film producers. It in fact happened that way.
Here, folks. Right. Again, please. Can we give Faye a mark? Please,
American music.
The situation for Faye Dunaway and Oscar Vernon is of a couple who, at this particular period in their lives, had been married for some time and were splitting up. But the emotional stress and the physical strains of this voyage and what they went through mentally, which I think is a powerful part of this film and of their performance, indeed brought them eventually together. This particular family had a very poignant story. The man had been on the run from the Gestapo. Much of the time in Germany, his family didn't know where he was, but they were able to arrange for him to go on this ship. But he still believed that the Gestapo were after him.
I have an ambivalent feeling about this film. First of all, I couldn't understand why anybody wanted to make it. I mean, I think it's... I would have thought the world has heard enough about the suffering of the poor Jews and what they went through. And like all suffering, if you hear about it often enough, you begin to get bored with it and you turn off it. And I suspected that was the reaction that people would have to it. On the other hand, this film has come at a time when Jews and Zionism is being attacked on a world level. And I feel it's important to remind the world what the Jews experienced. And therefore, I feel it is an important picture for this time. And I'm a Jew myself, and a non-practicing Jew, but it's good for me to be reminded that I am a Jew.
Play it again, please. One more time. Where's the playback?
Very still, please. You want to take 1 A and B cameras? Playback.
Wien, nur du allein soll stets
meine Träume sein.
As the night wore on, and as songs were sung which reminded them of what they thought was their home, Germany, and what they were leaving behind, it became a very sort of poignant party.
Mädchen gehen, Wien, Wien, nur du allein. Soll steht die Stadt meine Träume sein. Dort, wo ich glücklich, selig bin, ist Wien, ist Wien. Mein Wien.
Well, the singer there was Ina Scriver. And that brings us more or less to the end of tonight's programme. Not quite to the end, though, because in all that coverage of the Academy Awards, I didn't mention the most notable British feat of all, the award of an Oscar for the Best Animated Short Film to the very talented British animator Bob Godfrey. The picture is called Great, and it's a witty and idiosyncratic view of the accomplishments of Isambard Kingdom Brunel. It's also worth pointing out that Mr. Godfrey paid his own way to Hollywood for the Academy Awards, and in his acceptance speech took the opportunity of pointing out rather tartly that contrary to accepted belief in America, Britain is not yet wholly in the gutter. Good for him, is what I say. And on that jingoistic note, I'll leave you with a sample of his Oscar-winning film. Until next Sunday, good night.
Nine, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Good evening. Tonight I'll be reviewing The Duchess and the Dirtwater Fox, which might almost be subtitled Not Very Butch Cassidy and the Dancehall Kid. We'll also be hearing briefly from the stars of that film, George Segal and Goldie Hawn. In addition, there'll be reviews of The Likely Lads, which, as you may have gathered, is a television spin-off, a thriller called The Sellout, which was made in Israel, a documentary, Promised Lands, which is about Israel and the 1973 war, and an Australian production called Between Wars. Furthermore, we have an interview with Gregory Peck on location recently in Surrey, and a preview of a season of British film musicals of the 30s, beginning at the National Film Theatre this week. But let's start with The Duchess and the Dirtwater Fox, a comedy set in the West towards the end of the last century about a tatty dancehall singer and an unsuccessful gambler. The singer is the waif-like Goldie Hawn. However, just after the film was completed, I was at the 20th Century Fox studios in Hollywood when Miss Hawn and George Segal were talking about their respective roles and the making of the picture.
I am the Duchess and play the Duchess. And George is the Dirtwater Fox. And We have a kind of a strange love affair where we can't stand each other. And in the end, we realize that we really can't survive without each other. And it's a beautiful story, and it's a very funny picture.
And Goldie Hawn is our first time, but I think we're going to be making pictures together for the rest of our lives. We had such a good time on this one. It was the most fun I've ever had making a movie. And sometimes you have fun making a movie, but it's not up on the screen, and here it is up on the screen.
All that fun on the screen? Well, up to a point, Lord Copper. On the other hand, what else could the poor man say? That he'd had a rotten time making the picture and he'd hate Goldie Hawn till the day he died? Unlikely, even if it were true, which I don't suppose it is. How could anyone have anything but a good time in the company of Goldie Hawn? Still, we'll have an assessment of the film later. Meanwhile, just to set up the next clip, unwittingly, Miss Hawn has stolen all Mr. Siegel's money and set off to marry a Mormon in Salt Lake City. It's that kind of a story, you see. Mr. Siegel catches up with her on a stagecoach, where, to confuse her travelling companion, they embark on the following crosstalk.
Votre Highness, où est la moula you el snatched from my hotel room last notte, s'il vous plaît?
Pardon?
Où hast du ungemachen mit mein Geld geflohen, meine feine Bluebird?
Geld geflohen?
Oui, mucho Geld geflohen.
Ah, Geld geflohen.
Si, oui, and jawohl.
Well, el Geld geflohen was absoluto necesario to purchase un fino dress necessario. Alle gesehen?
Alles Geld por uno lousy dress necessario.
Si, el uno dress necessario was uno grosso bargain.
El bullshitterinio, mademoiselle.
And molto importante to impresarunio molto importante Mormon. Mucho loaded Mormon.
Questo Mormon, el schmucko here?
No, nein el schmucko here. Meine Mormon is numero uno. Eine große Tycoon-type Mormon.
Ah, Tycoon-type Mormonarinio.
Si, Tycoon-arunio.
With mucho Gelto?
Absoluto. Hat gehabt Salt Lake City in his back pocket gemacht.
Ah, tres interessante.
Well, that's one of the funniest and certainly one of the cleverest sequences in the film. Not easy for the actors, though, as George Siegel explains.
It was finely and carefully scripted, and we learned it like you would do a stage play. It took me an entire weekend of working on it all. I was like a monk. I just went away from everybody and learned that thing, because to learn double talk is really tough. To learn gibberish is the toughest thing you can do as an actor, and then make meaning out of it.
And so to the film itself. Miss Hawn, of course, is not really a duchess at all, but only pretends to be, for the sole purpose, as far as I could tell, of getting the word duchess into the title. Mr. Siegel is the Dirtwater fox because Dirtwater is the town he comes from and is always being hunted out of on account of the way he cheats at cards. Apart from the love story between the two of them, the plot also revolves around the fate of Mr. Siegel's money. Well, it's not really his money. He helped a gang to steal it and then stole it from them, and they keep trying to get it back. Nevertheless, such is the morality of the age in which we live, he regards this money as his own, lawfully earned, and we're strongly encouraged to agree with him. In short, Hawn and Siegel are clearly supposed to be a couple of lovable rogues, just like Butch and Sundance, except that for a change, and it's a welcome change, one of them happens to be a woman. I'm getting rather bored with platonic love affairs between two men. Mel Frank is the director and co-author of The Duchess and the Dirtwater Fox, and some of the set pieces are very funny and some of them aren't. I suspect there were moments when Mel Frank was trying too hard to be Mel Brooks, but on the whole it's a fairly engaging comedy, and if some of the situations, like the one we're about to see, are pretty corny, they're at least approached with a certain zest. The Duchess and the Dirtwater Fox opens in London this week and goes on general release in September. The Likely Lads, on the other hand, had its world premiere last week in Newcastle, and what could be more appropriate? This, of course, is a spin-off from that marvellously funny TV series, and it's a distinct cut above most other TV spin-offs. The story starts with the wartime conception, literally, of Bob and Terry, played naturally by Rodney Bewes and James Bolam, and continues to the climax in the latest marital crisis of Bob and Thelma, played as usual by the splendid Bridget Forsyth. The general situations will be familiar to all addicts, Terry drifting aimlessly, concerned only with birds and booze, and Bob going through one of his crises of identity. In the chocolate box of life, he says, the top layer's already gone, to which Terry replies, as any sensible person would, bloody hell. And so it goes on, from one mild disaster to another, with Terry intermittently pursuing Bob through the streets of Gateshead in a loudspeaker van, like the voice of doom. The film, being 90 minutes long, isn't quite as sharp or as consistently funny as the 30-minute TV episodes, but the characters are beautifully observed, both by the cast and by the writers, Dick Clement and Ian LaFrennais, and generally speaking, it's great fun. Well, this week, there's the start of a season of British film musicals of the 1930s at the National Film Theatre in London. British film musicals have never been particularly distinguished, and the musicals of the 30s were no exception. But they did at least provide a means for a wider audience to see stars of genuine talent who'd made their name in the theatre. people like Jack Buchanan, George Formby, Jack Hulbert and Cicely Courtnidge. So as a gesture towards nostalgia, which in these frightful times is understandably fashionable, here's a montage of 3 of the biggest stars of the age and 3 of their biggest hits. Don't be too critical, just sit back and enjoy it.
Your passion still possesses you in pain. She does not hear, or hearing gives no heed, or pity to another's broken reed. Hear my confession still, oh dear, my dearest. Thine is my heart, thine is my heart, and ever tell me, my dearest.
They don't make them like that anymore, and perhaps it's just as well. But now, by way of stern contrast to all that frothy escapist nonsense, here's some nasty escapist nonsense. A thriller called The Sellout, made in Israel. The central character is Oliver Reed, as a double agent whom both the CIA and the KGB are trying to kill. Very public-spirited act, if you ask me, since Mr. Reed scowls his way through the film, being consistently unpleasant to all. Richard Widmark plays a retired CIA agent and Mr. Reed's only friend, and Gail Honeycutt is the woman in both their lives. Basically, the film, directed by Peter Collinson, is just a lengthy excuse for repeated scenes of violence and constantly reminds us of its own inferiority by quoting lines of dialogue from much better thrillers of the past. There is one rather good and icy performance by Vladek Shebal as a hired assassin, but otherwise it's pretty gruesome stuff. Here now, though, is Oliver Reed in the inevitable escape scene.
Be careful now.
And now for this evening's interview. A little while ago, Gregory Peck, who's one of the old-time superstars, as well as a kind of elder statesman of Hollywood, was filming on location in Surrey for a picture called The Omen. Apart from the fact that it co-stars Lee Remick and is about an American ambassador to London whose wife gives birth to the devil's child, I know very little about it. On the surface, it appears to be yet another rip-off of The Exorcist, although the presence in the cast of the grave and likeable Mr. Peck should certainly lend it dignity. So anyway, while the unit was on location in the garden of a large and impressive Surrey mansion, I took the opportunity to engage the aforementioned Mr. Peck in conversation and said how unusual it was to find him in a horror film.
Well, there's always a first time. It's true. I have not been in one before, although I've been in suspense films, and we made a film some years ago called Cape Fear, in which Robert Mitchum menaced my family, my wife, my young daughter, and myself, because I'd been, as an attorney, instrumental in packing him off to jail for a well-deserved 8 years. That was quite a chilling, suspenseful film, but I've never been in an out-and-out horror story.
So why did you pick this one?
Well written. Well written. I think it will be a better devil film or satanic film, one of the better ones. I think it's a good piece of writing. I think it's suspenseful, and I think it's legitimate entertainment.
Why do you think there's this interest in satanic films all of a sudden? There's a whole crop of them about. Is it because The Exorcist suddenly took off and made a lot of money, or is there some deeper reason?
Well, it's because The Exorcist took off and made a lot of money, but why did it? And I'm really... Your speculation is as good as mine, but I think it's because my guess would be that there's so many horrendous things going on in the world, violence and mayhem on all sides, and I think people search for an explanation. Why isn't it as good a world and as peaceful and decent a world as we think that it used to be, or perhaps even was?
This is your first film for 3 years. Why have you been away so long?
Well, I had 2 ventures as a producer. One was called The Trial of the Catonsville Nine. It did its bit to stimulate public opinion against our policy in Vietnam. May have made a tiny contribution to getting us out of there a little bit sooner than we might have otherwise. It was a low-budget film taken from a successful play. It had a limited distribution, but I'm rather glad that we made it. Then the second one was the venture film about the young boy who sailed around the world, the Robin Graham, called The Dove. I'm enjoying this picture for many reasons, but among them is the fact that it took me only 10 weeks to get it made. To produce a film from beginning to end is a year or a year and a half out of your life.
One gets the impression that you're moving away from acting. I know you're not planning to retire from the screen, but have you lost interest in acting?
Well, one doesn't necessarily have to go on doing the same thing forever. I've been doing it for 30 years and 5 or 6 years on the stage before that, so it's a lot of play acting to have done. Then, of course, one does get older, and the casting possibilities become more limited, and that's all part of the game too. And the challenge of assuming the responsibility for a project from the first idea through to the finished product is a new adventure, and I'm not tired of acting. And I'm not tired of looking for new challenges and new adventures either.
As he says, he may be getting older, but he looks in pretty good nick to me. I have the feeling that at some point in the plot of The Omen, the satanic child exercises an unhealthy influence over an American president. Whether the scriptwriter was guided by hindsight or had any particular recent American president in mind, I don't think it's my place to say. In any event, The Omen will probably be seen here before the end of the year. And in the meantime, here's an extract from early on in the film when Peck and his wife Lee Remick and child are still living happily in Rome.
What are you doing home so early?
Just came to start packing.
What?
Oh, we can't waste any time. We're leaving in the morning. We'll
Buongiorno, Carlo.
Buongiorno, signora Duchess.
Yes, hello. Oh, what are you talking about?
I am talking about London. I am talking about the ambassador to the court of St. James.
Well, what about it?
You're married to him.
What?
Hey, it's me. I'm appointed ambassador to Great Britain.
Oh! Oh!
And from there on, the plot thickens. Well, I suppose you'd have to, really. And that's just about all for now. I'll be back next week with, among other things, a review of a new British adventure thriller, Shout at the Devil, and an illustrated glance through the autobiography of James Cagney, who claims somewhat disappointingly that he never did say, "You dirty rat." Another illusion shattered. Meanwhile, let me leave you with a look at the work of Gregory Peck, film producer, an impressive storm sequence from The Dove, the story of a boy who sailed alone around the world. Until next Sunday, good night.
My brother lives in Washington. He works for Health, Education, and Welfare, and he said that he told me about it. And in fact, he'd met Carl Bernstein at a party. He knew a few reporters. And he said there's this thing that's happening. I told him to look into it, and then he told me that Redford had bought it, and I said, well, that's that.
Good evening. That, of course, was Dustin Hoffman explaining earnestly, but not all that coherently, how he landed a leading role in the big film of the week, All the President's Men. In this, he and Robert Redford co-star as the two Washington Post reporters who exposed the Watergate scandal, and in so doing made so much money that they'll probably live happily ever after. In a moment or two, we'll have some comments from Mr. Redford, who also co-produced the picture. But All the President's Men is not the only film of the week, and so later in the programme we'll have reviews of Shivers, a Canadian horror picture which could lay modest claim to being the sickest movie of the year, and Death Race 2000, a very agreeable black comedy which is a bit like Rollerball with engines. In addition, we'll have some scandalous revelations about Sherlock Holmes, as portrayed by Nicol Williamson in The 7% Solution, together with some earlier and rather more discreet portrayals of that immortal sleuth. And just to round things off, there's a preview of a contemporary murder mystery with a medieval flavour. But let's return to All the President's Men, which is based on the best-selling book by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, the young Washington Post reporters whose dogged and tireless investigations finally helped bring down Richard Nixon. Robert Redford, an actor with a more intelligent interest in politics than most, bought the film rights while the book was still being written for either £500,000 or £250,000, depending on which source you prefer to believe. He plays Bob Woodward, who wrote the first story about the Watergate burglary, and the scene we're about to watch shows how Carl Bernstein, played by Dustin Hoffman, rode himself in on the act.
What are you doing? Polishing. You what? Polishing. What's wrong with it? Nothing. It's good. Then what are you doing with it? I'm just helping. It's a little fuzzy. May I have it? I don't think you're saying what you mean. I know exactly what I mean.
Not here. I can't tell from this whether Hunt works for Colson or Colson works for Hunt. May I have it, please? So many conclusions. May I have it? Yes, I'm not looking for a fight. I'm not looking for a fight either. I'm just aware of the fact that you've only been here 9 months. What has that got to do with anything? Well, I've been in the business since I'm 16. What are you saying? Well, I'm trying to tell you that if you'd read mine and then read yours... May I read yours? Yeah. I walked by, gave yours a glance. It didn't look right, so I just figured I'd refine it a little. That first paragraph has to have more clarity. The reader's going to understand it. You don't mention Colson's name to the third paragraph. I think mine's better, but you go ahead and read it. If you think yours is better, we'll give yours to the desk. I got Colson's name up front. He was a White House consultant, and nobody knows it. Yours is better.
What does seem to be generally agreed is that Warner Brothers spent £5 million making the picture, of which at least £250,000 went on an exact replica of the Washington Post offices. Apparently, Redford himself insisted on complete accuracy, even down to a duplication of the rubbish in the waste paper baskets. It was in this office, knocked up at Warner Brothers Studios in Hollywood, that Redford talked to an Australian television reporter, Bill Collins, about All the President's Men and the degree of compromise accepted in politics today.
I don't know any area of life that doesn't involve compromise. And what's unfortunate is when we're dominated by a system that involves so much compromise in decision-making, I think a certain amount of it has to be. We have to compromise in order to keep a kind of moderate middle ground to make intelligent decisions or sane decisions. But sometimes that compromise gets to be too broad so that nothing gets done.
Is this why a character like Bob Woodward or a real person like Bob Woodward would appeal to you so much? Because he stopped compromising? Or
No, I don't think either one of the two reporters. Compromise didn't have too much to do with it, only in the sense that they compromised very little to get what they wanted. I mean, they were obsessed with the story. They were just two characters who were obsessed with getting the story. In Bob Woodward's case in particular, he was obsessed with work, period. And Bernstein, I'll let Hoffman talk about. But I don't think they were aware so much of the word compromise. I mean, sure, there's compromise in a newspaper. I mean, for example, you have to have, at least the Washington Post did, 3 sources before they would print a story. 2 sources wasn't enough. And those 3 sources had to be independent sources to be sure that the story they were going to print was accurate. So that there's an element of compromise there. You might have one source that's very, very good, and your hunch might tell you that it's the absolute truth. But you withhold the story because you can't get 2 other independent sources to substantiate what you're writing. So therefore, the story may never come out. I mean, the newspapers are filled with stories that were never able to be printed because there was an element of compromise. But it was healthy compromise because it's more dangerous to print something that is inaccurate and possibly injure someone's life or reputation because of it. So there's a great check and balance system going on, and that involves compromise. But the 2 characters themselves were just obsessed with getting a story that turned out to be something like a detective story. It was following clues that led ultimately to the Oval Office.
Hi, this is Carl. I'm sorry to disturb you now, but we're going with the story that Holmes was the 5th man in control of the fund, and they're hassling us here. We got 3 confirmations, but if you could just help us, I'd appreciate it.
Look, I won't say anything about Haldeman, not ever.
I understand that. We wouldn't want you to do that. We know it's against the law for you to say anything. If there's some way you could warn us to hold on the story, we'd appreciate it.
I'd really like to help you, but I can't.
Look, I'm going to count to 10, all right? If there's any reason we should hold on the story, hang up the phone before I get to 10. If the story's all right, you'll just be on the phone after I get to 10, all right?
Hang up, right?
That's right. You got it?
Yeah.
We're straight. All right, I'm going to start counting. Okay? We all right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
You got it straight now? Everything okay?
Everything's fine.
We got it. He confirmed. What happened? I said if I get to 10 and you don't hang up, it's solid. Did he confirm it? Absolutely. You got to tell Bradley. Bernstein got another source. The guy just was confirmed.
If there's any doubt, we can run it tomorrow.
You don't have to. The story's solid. We're sure of it.
He's just got off the phone with him. It's gold.
Okay, we go with it.
a lot of the excitement of the script here, and I use the word excitement deliberately because there's got to be suspense in it. We know what the outcome is, so there's got to be suspense in the way it gets to
Absolutely. In other words, the danger to this film is that the public knows what happened. Yes. You're not surprising them with the outcome. What the public doesn't know was how it happened. It's kind of a how-done-it.
Would I be asking too much, then, from you to say at what point did these two men, either separately or together, realise they were onto something that was quite tremendous?
When they had... they were able to tie one character named Chapin to an alleged dirty tricks campaign that involved the slush fund at the Committee to Re-elect the President and a campaign to disseminate dirty tricks to the other political candidates. That one of the people involved with that, the man who hired people for dirty tricks, was the appointment secretary to Nixon. That put the story clearly inside the Oval Office. When that happened, and they realized that they were about to print something that said that it could possibly involve, or the implication was that it could involve the man who was the President of the United States, they realized that they could be doing something that could alter the course of history, and then they were scared.
And scared is what they had every right to be, not least because the closer they got to the White House, the more it became clear that their own lives might be in danger. Not, I suspect, in quite as much danger as the film suggests, although, of course, it's easy enough for me to say that, sitting here never having brought down a president in my life. All the President's Men deals with the early part of the Watergate scandal, from the burglary up to the point when Woodward and Bernstein finally traced the culprits all the way back to the White House. It presupposes a certain amount of prior knowledge on the part of the audience, but even so, it's a gripping tale, a kind of political detective story, unravelled by a couple of men whose greatest attribute was perseverance. In a sense, it's almost dramatised documentary as we watch Woodward and Bernstein, or Woodstein as they were collectively known, following up one tiny clue after another and keeping mysterious rendezvous with an unidentified informant known only by the enigmatic nickname of Deep Throat. All this detective work, the slotting together of a complex and potentially dangerous jigsaw puzzle, is impressively detailed, thanks partly to William Goldman's original script, and perhaps equally to improvisation by the cast and director Alan Pakula. What is also impressive is the camera work by Gordon Willis, which shows that Washington Post ablaze with light, as though it were the very stronghold of purity and truth, while the rest of Washington is dark, secretive and menacing, full of men in black hats, as opposed to the symbolically white-hatted Woodstein. Indeed, the one major flaw in the film is that it doesn't tell us enough about the relationship between Woodward and Bernstein, two men who worked closely together but didn't apparently like each other that much. Good performances, though, from Redford and Hoffman, and even better ones from Martin Balsam and Jason Robards, who plays the Post's executive editor Ben Bradley, the author of Conversations with Kennedy, and a man who says, "I don't trust anyone." A safe motto, certainly, for a newspaper man, but one that must surely make the rest of his life rather uncomfortable. Here, though, in one last look at All the President's Men, we see all of them discussing John Mitchell's involvement in Watergate.
Certain on Mitchell?
We know that he approved payments to Liddy while he was Attorney General.
You got more than one source.
Yes, Harry.
Who are they?
Sloan and Wells. And there's another guy, Justice, who so far won't confirm the names of the other two who control the fund that we're working on.
Well, Deep Throat.
He's not a source on this.
Look, do any of them have an axe?
No.
Personal, political, sexual? Is there anything at all on Mitchell?
No.
Then can we use the names?
No.
Damn it, when is somebody gonna go on the record in this story?
You guys are about to write a story that says the former Attorney General, the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in this country, is a crook. Just be sure you're right.
All the President's Men opened in London last week and will be shown in various cities throughout the country from tomorrow. It's the latest and in many ways the most outspoken in a long and pretty honourable tradition of movies in which America has plucked the political fluff from its navel and held it up to a critical light. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, starring James Stewart, was one example. The Candidate, featuring, by coincidence, or perhaps not, Robert Redford, was another. And very possibly as good as any, there was The Best Man, the screen version of Gore Vidal's novel in which Cliff Robertson and Henry Fonda are engaged in a bitter and dirty fight for the presidential nomination of their party, and both seek the support and endorsement of the outgoing president, played by Lee Tracy. In this scene, Cliff Robertson finds himself being criticised by the man whose support he most wants.
No, sir. You don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't philander. You're just about the purest young man that I've ever known in public life.
Well, I try to be, sir.
Sure, Joe, sure. Young man, you've done a remarkable job in the Senate most of the time.
Most of the time?
Oh, there've been moments when I've questioned your methods.
Well, you got to fight fire with fire, Mr. President.
In the end, justifies the means, huh?
Well, yes, I believe that.
Well, son, I got news for you about both politics and life. May I say the two are exactly the same? There are no ends, Joe. Only means.
I don't like to disagree with you, sir, but that's just plain sophistry. You tell me there are no...
No. None of those highfalutin words that poor old Art Hochstadter. I'm just an ignorant country boy. All I'm saying is that what matters in our profession, which is really life, is how you do things and how you treat people and what you really feel about them. And not some ideal goal for society or for yourself.
Then am I to assume, Mr. President, from the statement you just made that you were against planning anything?
Oh, here it comes. I know that voice. Senator Cantwell, boy crusader, up there on TV with all...
Oh, I realize some of my methods upset a lot of people, particularly criminals and communists.
Look, I don't object to your headline grabbing and you're crying wolf all the time. That's standard stuff in politics. What disturbs me is you're taking your own phony stuff so seriously. It's par for the course trying to fool the people. But it's downright dangerous when you start fooling yourself.
Well, that film was made in 1964, and I wonder if things would have been different in America if Richard Nixon had studied Lee Tracy's message more closely. The thing about those films and films like them is that they simply underline my conviction that American politics is the most fascinating spectator sport in the world. And in a very oblique way, I suppose that observation leads us on to the second of the week's new or newer films, Death Race 2000, which is peripherally about American politics, but mostly about the deadliest spectator sport in the world, the annual transcontinental death race. The situation briefly is this. In the year 2000, America is still so shattered by the effects of war and the Great Depression of 1979 that it's only the excitement offered by the annual race that keeps the country from revolution. The object of this race is not only to beat the other competitors from New York to New Los Angeles, but to tot up bonus points on the way by running over pedestrians. The points are earned on a sliding scale up to 100, depending on the age and sex of the slaughtered party. Doddery old people over 75 score very high indeed. The perennial hero of the race is the mysterious Frankenstein, played by David Carradine, who's been involved in so many spectacular crashes that his body is composed almost entirely of spare parts. Here he is being introduced to the TV audience at the start of the race.
Frankenstein the Indestructible, sole survivor of the Titanic pileup of '95, only two-time winner of the Transcontinental Road Race. Frankenstein, ripped up, wiped out, battered, shattered, creamed and reamed, a dancer on the brink of death. Frankenstein, who lost a leg in '98, an arm in '99, with half a face and half a chest and all the guts in the world, he's back. God only knows what he looks like under that mask, but he is back. In the name of Mr. President, America loves you, Frankenstein.
Well, as you may have guessed, there's a strong similarity between Death Race 2000 and Rollerball. But the main difference between them is that Death Race doesn't take itself half so seriously. In fact, it's a very funny black comedy, and as a result, it puts across its warning about the dangers of remote and all-powerful government rather more effectively than Rollerball does. Anyway, the main concern of the film is the race itself, in which the 5 competitors speed across America, gratefully mowing down any pedestrians careless enough to get in their way. But intertwined with this is a subsidiary plot about a group of revolutionaries who try to sabotage the race and kidnap Frankenstein. The leader of these revolutionaries is a lady called Thomasina Paine, a joke which will not be lost on students of American history. The point about the film, of course, is that it's in thoroughly bad taste, but despite, or perhaps because of that, it's also thoroughly enjoyable. David Carradine is good as Frankenstein, and Sylvester Stallone provides excellent support as his chief rival, Machine Gun Joe Viterbo. We can see both of them now with their navigators at the start of the second stage of the great race.
Oh, Mr. President, bless thy children and make them strong. Bless thy daughters, Matilda and Jane, and thy son Joe. And bless thy beloved son, the immortal Frankenstein, who has given so much pleasure to so many.
The hell with Frankenstein. What about Joe Viterbo?
The flag is down and they're away with Machine Gun Joe blasting into the lead on this second lap of the great Transcontinental Road Race. Frankenstein is making a left turn, splitting early from the pack. Look out, all you folks just south of here.
Gee, Joe, there's nobody even close behind us.
Where's he going? What's he doing?
Hey, what are you doing? Where are we going?
I dropped my glove.
Let not the ruin of thy roads destruct the tires of thy...
You Chrysler! Ladies and gentlemen, by a said, Frankenstein has killed our cherished colleague, the deacon of the bipartisan party.
I think you did that on purpose.
Have to give the fans something to talk about. It's my obligation as a national hero.
I don't suppose I have to ask you who this is, because the answer is elementary, my dear Watson, as Sherlock Holmes never did say, despite strong rumours to the contrary. Holmes has been a subject of eternal fascination to filmmakers since 1903, and it's safe to say that at least 50 pictures have been made using, and just as often abusing, Conan Doyle's famous detective as the hero. The latest in this occasionally splendid but often tatty line is The 7% Solution, directed by Herbert Ross and based on a novel by Nicholas Meyer, in which Holmes, utterly hooked on a 7% solution of cocaine, is treated for his drug addiction by Sigmund Freud. Don't take any notice of that rumbling sound you hear. It's simply Conan Doyle spinning in his grave. Nicol Williamson plays Holmes and Robert Duvall is Dr. Watson, and we visited Pinewood Studios during the filming.
The only person so intimately connected with Miss Devereux's present that he might know something of our past.
This plot deals with a period in Sherlock Holmes' life between 1891 and 1894 when he was hopelessly addicted to cocaine and was no longer functioning as a detective, and accounts for the missing period in Conan Doyle's works. Why there were no Sherlock Holmes stories published between 1891 and 1894. The uniqueness of this particular work, I hope, is that you're going to see Sherlock and Dr. Watson closer to the Conan Doyle reality than you've ever seen dramatized before. In fact, they are being played by Nicol and Robert at exactly the age as defined by Conan Doyle. They're 36 years old.
I want to not get away from the idea of Deerstalker and Meerschaum and Ulster and Inverness, but I want really the feeling that Holmes is taking you along in a great adventure that you are part of and that you become enthralled by and horrified by and stimulated by, and several things that just fall out as we go along on this trail are funny, touching, moving, and not to concentrate on any kind of myth in terms of you know, the silhouette, and assuming too much.
I might say at the outset that I'm definitely not trying to play him dumb or bumbling the way it's been portrayed in the past, the few times that I've seen it. I think that he's a very bright young man in certain areas. He's a physician of note, and we're playing him, even though with a wounded leg, he's an ex-rugby player, an perhaps amateur boxer. And he's just a very loyal kind of friend for Sherlock Holmes that will do anything for this man that he, you know, in a very good, positive way. He reveres the man and respects him, and I think that he'll do anything to get this man to Vienna.
Dr. Freud, how did you get here before us?
By trying to think where they would hide Fräulein Devereux if, as you posited, they would no longer use the original hiding place. Knowing something of Fräulein Devereux's past, it occurred to me that the safest place to hide a demi-mondaine might be amongst a bevy of demi-mondaine.
He comes to Freud to get cured of his cocaine addiction, which is something that was in existence in the stories themselves, I believe. And Freud helps him with his addiction and then takes him to visit one of his other patients who had been an addict and now is again an addict. And he shows it to Holmes, shows this person to Holmes and says, this is what could happen to you if you're not careful. And Holmes says, no, this person is no longer an addict. She's been drugged by people who are trying to do her in. And from then on, we're on an adventure.
Action.
Muslims? You mean religious differences at the bottom of all this? I can't believe it. Murdering nuns in brothels.
I've always been a keen observer since I've been about this high of various accents in America. There's a Maryland accent as opposed to a certain Northern Virginia accent where my father's from. And I've always been into that, and so far I've always leaned in this direction that I would like to try a certain type of Englishman.
It's not a literal transcription of who Sigmund Freud really was. It's a kind of a pastiche based on accurate information about Freud, and also the difficult thing is trying to hang on to my own reality of who this guy Freud was, and how far I can extend him into this fantasy without losing sight of him completely.
It's been very difficult sometimes, but the difficulties have been enjoyable because you've had to work your way through them to just let it happen. So therefore, Holmes will be perhaps a lot of me, and therefore, if you don't like my Sherlock Holmes, maybe you don't like me.
Latakia.
Many people smoke Turkey cigarettes.
True, but only Turks smoke this brand. The cigarette paper is indigenous to the Ottoman Empire. Our Turkish tobacco is shipped raw and processed in Europe and in England. And what can this be?
A strand of carpet, also Turkish.
That's the cut. Cut.
Well, the 7% solution won't be seen here until later in the year, so we'll have to wait and see what kind of a fist Nicol Williamson makes of playing the great detective. No doubt everyone has his own favourite screen Holmes, and for me it will always be Basil Rathbone. But I'm broad-minded enough to concede that not all of you will agree with me. So here's a montage of great Sherlocks of the past, compiled by Philip Jenkinson. Good gracious, Holmes, is it really you? By the way, did you spot our deliberate mistake? Well, of course you did. Gene Wilder didn't play Sherlock Holmes at all. He played Sherlock Holmes' smarter brother. Still, it's all in the family. One last point on Holmes. Even as I sit here, yet another Sherlockian epic is being filmed, this time with Roger Moore in the starring role. I only hope the producers aren't tempted to cash in on Mr. Moore's fame as James Bond by calling the film the 007% solution. But now, to round off tonight's programme, here's a preview of a picture called Trial by Combat, which should be coming our way later next month. It stars people like John Mills and Donald Pleasance, and is about a young man who sets out to solve his father's murder. A familiar sort of plot, really, except that in this case the young man has been brought up according to the code of chivalry of the Knights of the Round Table, and so he plans his pursuit of the villains rather like a medieval crusade. Till next week, then, I'll leave you with a somewhat unusual car chase in which the spirit of King Arthur rides again. Good night.